right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be up here for more than 10 seconds. This is my portion for today. I just want to say thanks now to everybody that came out for this external to Volato. This is something important to us, but it really shows that there's other commitment outside of Volato by your presence here. So thank you. Thanks to the Med-Air folks. Julie, thank you. And Tim, thank you for coming. And Allianz and everyone else in attendance. So this is the first one open to the public, and I'm hoping it won't be the last. So, well, here's my contact information if anybody wants to take a photo. I'm here all day. I can give you a card after that. Okay. Good, thanks. This is just some background. Not as impressive as Mr. Neustetter or JP that spoke before. I joined Volato last year. I'm 1 year this month. I started off with the dedicated professionals in the operation control, in OCC. And then last month I moved over to safety. And I think this is a good fit for me, given my background, Navy, aviation safety, installation safety, and I'll talk to a little bit about that. By the pictures up here, you can tell that I'm a helicopter guy by trade. I started my career in 1992 in the Navy, went to flight school, got my wings in 1995, did 2 tours in helicopters, carrier-based helicopters. In between those 2 tours, I was a fixed-wing instructor flying the venerable T-34 Charlie Mentor. I think a couple of you in here may have flown that. And went back to sea, went back to the aviation safety school, did my department head tour as the safety officer there, and I continued that safety experience through the rest of my career. In 2009, I went from flying to installation management. I had the great opportunity and the honor of serving as deputy commander of 3 installations in Mideast and Europe. 2 are represented here. The one on the left is Naval Station Rota, Spain, largest Navy runway in Europe, most strategically placed logistics hub in Western Europe, and then Naval Air Station Signal, and that's where I retired out of at the end of 2020. And that is the hub of the Med for logistics for the Navy Air Force. Anything going down to the Mideast or back came through Sigonella. So I had great opportunity to learn a lot there: installation management, aviation, airfield security, explosive safety, airfield safety, FEMA incident management, incident response, and everything that goes with that. So I think it's a good fit where I'm at now in Volato, and I'm really enjoying my time here. I want to thank Josh Neustetter for implementing that move, and of course Fernando Vizcarona, those of you who knew, was heading safety before that, and he is always going to be my lodestar for safety guidance there. Today, I'm not going to talk data. I'm not going to run through case studies and drill down into rabbit holes on causes of accidents and investigations and things like that, but there's two things I want to bring up. This case here with Korean Air 801, raise your hand if you've heard of it. Accident in Guam, and then there's one that many of you probably haven't heard of. I'll do that after here. And you'll see where I'm going with it as we move along. This Korean Air 801, 1997, Guam, had 250 people on board, crashed into a hillside on approach to the destination airport. Multiple causes cited by the NTSB. The report is online. Anybody can get that. I read through it for the last 2 weeks, but something just kept jumping out at that, and I'll get to that in a second. 747, very experienced crew. The captain had 8,900 plus hours, 3,100 hours or more in type. First officer, over 4,000 hours. 1,500 in type. Flight engineer, 13,000 hours and 1,500 in type. You cannot deny the experience there. I will say something about experience, though, and Steve, that's a great quote you had this morning. You can have all the hours in the world, you put it all together, they're great, but the ones that count the most are the ones that are happening right now and the ones that are to come. So we see the experience here. Does it have a factor in what happened in the incident? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate. I won't speculate on this, and I won't speculate too much on the one after this. But needless to say, very experienced crew. What happened is it was a controlled flight into terrain. Everything was fine during the flight. It was just the last 20 or so minutes stabilizing on the approach, getting on the a localizer. The captain initially thought he was flying an ILS, didn't get the signal for the ILS wasn't coming in. He thought it was working. The first officer and the flight engineer said it wasn't working. They resolved that near the end, but unfortunately it was too late. Multiple other factors taking place in this incident: a breakdown in CRM, fatigue. The crew was on extended duty during that time. The NTSB cited inadequate training for non-precision approaches for the air crew, and inadequate ATC support. Weather was also a factor. But the one I want to focus on is bring this up is cultural issues, and that's going to be the crux of my discussion after this. It was cited by the NTSB, but it wasn't specifically mentioned as a cause. But what draws to that is the CRM concerns. In the last few minutes prior to impact, the cockpit voice recording had indicated a couple things, such as deference to authority, reluctance to challenge errors. This is coming from the first officer and the flight engineer. The CVR indicated weak challenges to error or no challenge at all. In the last 6 seconds before impact, it was noted that an error was challenged. The first officer could have taken controls before the aircraft impacted the ground, but he neglected to do so. The NTSB noted recent company promotion of a more free communication atmosphere in the cockpit. That tells me that they had recognized something that was lacking before that in the company culture. Why would they implement a new safety standard, a new safety initiative, if it wasn't a problem before? Again, I'm not going to speculate on did this really cause, is this the final cause of this incident? How significant was it? It certainly played a factor, but I'm not going to, give my, I don't have a professional opinion on it, but it causes me to look a little bit deeper. And it tells me the flight engineer and the first officer were reluctant to challenge the authority. And the company culture, where is that coming from? Is it coming from the company? Is it coming from their prior experience? All three were trained by the Korean Air Force. It's just something to think about. Take that into this next example, if you could. I took off the call sign of the first one because I know these folks. I'm just going to talk about the incident, and I do get a little emotional when I do reference this. This happened in 1996, USS Enterprise, carrier operations in the Persian Gulf. The helicopter you had 12 people on board, 2 crew, 2 gunners, and 8 SEALs. They had just completed a helicopter visit board search and seizure, HVBSS operations. You can see a depiction of that there, the fast rope down onto an enemy combatant ship. The SEALs will take over the ship. The aircraft will fly cover next to it. Once the ship is under our control, they pick them up and then they go home. They had completed that. It was to a U.S. vessel. It was a practice. It was an exercise. And they were waiting to land in between carrier cycles, waiting for all the jet aircraft to land. And they were in starboard delta, which is on the starboard side of the ship within 5 miles. I was on the ship that day. I was in the squadron that day. I was waiting in the ready room to take that aircraft. I was the new co-pilot to the squadron, 4 months into the squadron, and I was waiting with my aircraft commander to take that particular aircraft when we heard aircraft in the water come over the 1MC. We had initially thought that it was a jet aircraft going through the cycle. We had never anticipated that it would be our own aircraft. In the first 10 minutes of the pandemonium there, we finally figured out it is ours. We launched the Alert 30 aircraft. That thing went out there. So I'm going to give you some background on this. I mentioned it was a very experienced crew. There's the cause. What happened, the pilot at controls was in waiting, and the time he was waiting to land the aircraft, decided to do some aerobatic maneuvers, or what you could consider aerobatic maneuvers for a helicopter. Flat hatting is what the Navy and military will call it. Any maneuver conducted at low altitude or at a high rate of speed for thrill purposes. We know from testimony after that that's what was going on. The SEALs in the back were enjoying the show. The pilot was executing his maneuvers until the very last maneuver, and he couldn't pull out of it. It was described as a wingover event. The aircraft pitched high nose up. Nose came through the horizon, a course reversal. I believe they came down to about 90 feet when the nose leveled off, but it wasn't enough energy to pull it out, and the aircraft went into the water. That's what happened that day, but so much was happening before we got to that day. I'll give you the background. The aircraft commander, the operations officer, he was not at the controls. He was the senior department head in the squadron. Very well respected, very commanding. He knew his stuff, very competent leader, but he was coming, he did not have enough time in this aircraft. He used to fly an H-3. Those of you who flew helicopters, you know what an H-3 is. It's a completely different airframe. The pilot at the controls was the senior lieutenant in the squadron. He was a NATOPS officer. He knew all tactics, all systems, all limitations. He was the de facto subject matter expert for everything on this aircraft. The way it flew, the missions, the profiles that you would fly, nobody could question this guy. He was the be-all to end-all. And that's where I'm building the culture here. 3 days before this accident, I was with that aircraft commander. I was with the pilot at the controls in this one. And he executed a maneuver that he called it a carrier break. I'll be honest with you, it was probably the coolest thing I've ever done in a helicopter. And it was probably the worst thing that we could have done in a helicopter. We were coming along, we usually land on spot 3 on the carrier. He came abreast to spot 3, rolled it into a 70, 80 degree turn, wrapped it up as quickly as he could. We sunk below the deck edge. We popped up on the next to the spot. I can see you shaking your head. Next to the spot, slid it over, and then we landed. I was not on the controls. He was in the left seat, I was in the right seat. Normally you land a helicopter from the right seat on an aircraft carrier. I thought he was the greatest pilot in the world. I got off, the aircraft went down to the intelligence center. You debrief after every flight. Every jet guy there was like, man, was that you in that helicopter? That was just the coolest thing we've ever seen. And you know, I was enjoying it. I was young Lieutenant J.G. Moran, enjoying the accolades of our high-speed jet aircraft pilots. It was pretty cool. 3 days later, we run into this. And it all has to do with culture. I'll talk a little bit about the SMS, the safety management system, but it does not, none of that can overcome culture. Culture, to me, is the most important thing, and I'll talk to Volato's approach to culture after this. By the way, does anybody, Tim, helicopters, is this familiar, this event? Is this familiar to you? Okay, I didn't know if it was a case study for you. When I went through the aviation safety officer school, this was our case study. It wasn't by design, it was just by coincidence that I was in that class, and this was the case study that they were talking about. And I got to learn a lot more about what happened that day than I did when I was in the squadron. I saw all the accident investigation photos, the underwater camera, the footage, the wreckage, unfortunately, photos of the remains of people that I knew I was friends with. It's an eye-opener. And what I bring with my experience is all centered on culture. It begins and ends with that. And I think we have a fantastic safety culture here in Volato. I'll move on from this stuff. Many of you have seen this slide before. This is standard FAA, NTSB stuff, talking about a safety management system. You have the policy, you have the management, the safety assurance. Right here, safety promotion, that's the culture. You can have all the technology, all the fancy tools, risk assessment tools, online databases. None of that means anything unless your safety promotion, unless your culture is where it needs to be. And I am happy to say that everything I'm seeing here at Volato is our culture is where it's at. But it's not an end game right there. It has to continue. And we can, I'll get to how we continue in a bit, but I just want to talk about some of the stuff that we engage with external partners. We're partners with Argus. We use the Armor Prism flight risk assessment tool before every flight. We've recently partnered with Wyvern, and we're Wyvern registered right now, moving towards Wyvern, the wingman standard. ISBEO, we're ISBEO Stage 2 accredited. We have our Stage 3 audit coming up this summer. So these are some of the external programs that we have, but the focus that we have to maintain within Volato is our culture. And we do that with these 5 critical elements. And the first one, I think, is clearly evident when Matt gave his opening remarks this morning, is leadership buy-in. It has to start at the top. And in Volato, it does start at the top. And it's not just the Matt, the CEO, the leader of the company, but it's the leadership. Everybody's a leader in a company, from Matt down to Mike, our Chief Operating Officer, Azim, VP of Standards, Josh, VP of Operations, DO. It's everybody. Everybody has an opportunity to be a leader. And we all have to have buy-in on that. The next is a free and open communication. Dr. Rohde had mentioned the, pointing to me as the Director of Safety, saying, I'm that safe space, and I am that safe space. Anyone in the company can come to me and talk about anything safety related. You will be heard, and your issues will be addressed. Number 3, we have a just safety culture. There is no reprisal. We don't seek to assign blame, but we seek to learn from our incidents. Matt had said they were near misses this morning. We learn from those, and we disseminate that information and send it on. Number 4 is the operational discipline. We see that with our risk mitigation and planning considerations that JP talked about this morning, with our EOD, our eligible on demand considerations and the differences between 91 and 135. We keep that at the forefront of our planning and the way we do our training and the way we conduct our flights. And then once you have the leadership buy-in, the free and open communication, just safety culture, and maintaining that discipline through constant review and training, then you're going to get the employee buy-in. And the buy-in is self-serving. Once the employees buy into that, it feeds back to the top, to the leadership buy-in, can reiterate that. The free and open communication continues on, the just safety culture maintains itself, and the operational discipline just continues on the way that it goes. I had a bunch of other slides after this, but I think just keeping these 5 up here is probably the best way to do that. Now, speaking of a culture, I can open this up to anyone else. Has anyone had experience with a negative safety culture before? Does anyone want to share a negative safety culture? Travis.
So in prior career, I was air traffic control for 8 years. And working in the tower, it was always really cool to see the pilots show off. Like you talked about the carrier break, and the hotshot pilots want to come in, and it may or may not have been promoted and endorsed, therefore solicited maybe by controllers going, hey, we want to see midfield right closed. If you can do it in front of the tower, that'd be cool. And pilots want to show off, so they would do it. And while it got some excitement and some awesome photographs and things like that, we would get talked to by the installation commander. One day the squadron commander was taxiing back on the adjacent runway right next to the tower, and he called up and asked, who was that? And we reluctantly gave him the information, and that pilot got grounded, and it turned into, all right, let's not do that anymore.
Okay.
So while it was fun for the moment and encouraged, and maybe to a fault by us, it definitely led to some discipline and some changes coming forward.
Yeah, I don't see that things like that pervasive in Volato. It's everybody wants to have a good time. Everybody, the Honda Jet's a high-speed aircraft. It's a rocket ship. It's wonderful to fly. It looks cool, but when it's operated safely, it's always going to look cool. There's no need to do anything extra. What they told us in safety school is like you're already doing the cool, fun things that you're doing. There's no reason to go outside of limits and do anything extra for that. And if we stay within our limits, that's all well and good. So, anybody else? Josh?
Say, if you threw the microphone at me. Yeah, two stories. I had a similar situation with the NATOPS officer. That's the standardizations officer for the squadron I was in. And we went out on a DDA, just to patrol in the day. And he's routinely going to a 60-degree angle bank in a Seahawk helicopter. And I said, hey, Lenbo, the limit on this aircraft is 45 degrees. He completely ignored it. And I went and I spoke to the skipper. It's Lenbo, it's Lenbo. So having leadership buy-in and, when is something going to break? It's going to break when you're at its limits or beyond the limits. It's not going to break during normal, routine, scripted operations. When you're going beyond the limit is when you're going to get something that's going to break. And I just thought that I was just shocked. I was the junior guy in the squadron, and here I am watching the guy that's in charge of standardizations exceed the limits of the aircraft. The other story I have is before you even met us, Jim Lawson, who was with Volato, me and Gary Brose, we were at a place out in David Wayne Hooks, and the owner of this company was crazy as a loon, and he had no concept of safety, and he was trying to make us do all kinds of stuff. There was no adherence to crew duty day, there's no adherence to flight time limits. Eventually, of course, the place failed and collapsed. Me and Jim and Gary had left way before that happened. We saw it coming, but there's a lot more of this than you guys may know. That's the interesting thing. And we're all making sure that Volato doesn't have that problem.
But that's my approach to the safety culture here. That's Matt's approach. It's these 5 critical elements, and we maintain those at the forefront of our operations, and we will continue to grow successfully. So with that, this is a good segue. I can lead into, we can take a 2-minute break, 3-minute break, but I can get Azim, our VP of Standards, and he can continue the dialogue, and then we can close out after that, unless anybody has any questions.